Good evening, class, and I am responding to Ellen Goodhart and her major claim being sustainable farming is the most viable form of agriculture. The secondary claims are sustainable farming requires less insecticide and herbicide inputs. 2 sustainable farms are water efficient, and 3 sustainable agriculture methods maintain soil as permanent, useful resource. I would like to respond to her first claim by stating that sustainable farming is not the most viable form of agriculture. I'd like to address that sustainable farming is not capable of working successfully. I have a quote here saying that no-till farming requires specialized seeding equipment designed to plant seeds into undistributed crop residues and soil. If the farmer has equipment designed for the tillage farming, purchasing equipment would be expensive, and while the cost would be offset by selling off plows, doing so is not usually done until the farmers decide to switch completely over. This would result in more money being invested into equipment, and in short term, it would not be, it would be too expensive. To add to that, in addition, planting vegetables through a mulch, a material such as decaying leaves, bark, or compost, can delay vegetable growth and maturity or promote problems with slugs, cutworms, or certain crop diseases. Lower soil temperatures under the mulch slows mineralization of soil nitrogen, which can reduce yields of some crops, especially broccoli and cool season greens, which need a lot of nitrogen over a relatively short period of time. To respond to her secondary claim, or to her second claim, sustainable farming is not the most water efficient form of agriculture. She supported this by saying that modern agriculture accounts for 80% of the nation's consumptive water use, and I have a quote here saying globally that agricultural sector consumes about 70% of planet's accessible fresh water, not 80%. Also, recirculating hydroponics is the most water efficient form of agriculture in the world. So sustainable farming is not the most water efficient form of agriculture, and she also did not use any statistics to show how much water loss is lost to evaporation and how much water loss is minimized in sustainable farming. To respond to her secondary claim 3, sustainable agriculture farming methods of permanent soil has negative effects in crops. This includes lack of crop rotation. Crop rotation is important to break up disease, insect, and weed cycles. Double cropping the same crops every year is not crop rotations. So a field must grow a different crop at the same time of the year in consecutive years to be in rotation. Fail to correct nutrient deficiencies. Fertilizers and lime can be surface applied, but they do not move much below the top of the 1 inch of soil without some type of tillage. Ideally, soil nutrient levels should be adequate throughout the root depth and not just at the top of the inch of soil yields. And they may suffer levels that aren't sufficient. So I would like to reaffirm that sustainable farming is not the most viable form of agriculture because it is not capable of working successfully. It is not the most water efficient form of agriculture, and sustainable agriculture farming methods of permanent soil has negative effects on crops. Thank you.
All right, structurally everything's easy to follow. I think the question of viability on the first point needs a little bit of definition because your argument has to do with it being economically viable, and I'm not exactly sure what the criteria was that the advocate was using for viability. So there might be a dispute there. I think you explained the cost issue to some degree, although I'm not sure in the long run that that's necessarily true. Initial startup costs appear to be raising some issue. There's a I think you could use a little bit of evidence that talks about how the yields are different. You make a reference to it, but it was not very clearly cited on that particular point. And it seems to me like that's one of the key issues if we're talking about viability is what the yields would be. So maybe spend a little bit more time on that point. On the second point, you know, I think on the water issue, you basically say, well, it's 70%, not 80%. I'm not sure that that's that critical an issue, and it may be different from one place to another, so I'm not sure that that gets you very much. The argument that there's a more efficient way to do it that actually uses a lot of water, I like that idea, and you talk about hydroponics, but there's no evidence on that particular point, and one of the things that I think would be necessary for this argument to be more applicable is a demonstration that hydroponics could be utilized on the variety of crops that the advocate's talking about. Some things you can grow hydroponically, I'm sure. I just don't think wheat and corn fit in that category, so that would probably be an issue. I don't know for sure, but I don't have any evidence suggesting that it's a likely outcome, so I think you need, like I said, a little bit more evidence on that particular point. On the third point on the crop rotation issue, I had an explanation of what crop rotation is. There's a discussion about what has to happen. It sounded to me like you were making an argument here that said tilling is going to be essential regardless of whether or not you use crop rotation, and I think I recall that the advocate suggesting that tilling is the thing that is problematic. So in essence, your argument is a kind of a workability argument that says you can't get away from the one thing that the advocate is saying is the problem. I think that's the argument. It needs to be a lot clearer. It just seemed like it's hanging out there, and I'm having to interpret this, and maybe I've interpreted correctly, maybe I've interpreted incorrectly. I'm sure that the advocate, if we were having a debate, would come up and explain why your interpretation was incorrect, but right now I'm just kind of sitting here going, that sounds like an interesting point. I think you'd need a better explanation on it. Got to look up and speak up a little bit more, take your time to explain some issues. Sometimes it just feels like you're rushing through the point and we're getting information without having the argument explained to us. All right, thank you.